Good afternoon and welcome to this week's 2-minute warning feature interview series, where every week we take a deeper dive into some of the trends and issues impacting the global energy transition. And we're joined this week by the CEO of Uniper, Mr. Andreas Schieringbeck. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Andreas, perhaps we could start in Germany. That's obviously your base and the home of Uniper, and probably the home of one of the greatest leaders in the energy transition. So I'd be interested to get an insight of how Germany is doing, how Uniper is participating in that, and particularly in the context of coming through this COVID disruption, how the energy transition in Germany is coexisting with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a wide field. Actually, that's a couple of questions.
It is.
But let's find out where we can start. I think Uniper, to describe that, actually we have two big business lines. We are a generator of electrical energy with around 34 gigawatts of installed base, starting from lignite, hard coal, gas units, water units, nuclear units, so traditional generator of energy. And of course, we are the biggest gas trader and importer of Germany. So we're operating pipelines, we're operating storages, we can store up to 8 BCM of gas. So we have a long tradition with that, dealing especially with the Russians since more than 50 years this year. So that's actually the two pillars of that. And you already started the discussion. We are in the transition. Of course, Germany, as you know, has started already years ago to transit away from traditional energy sources to renewable sources, to wind, solar, which we don't have in our portfolio. They're exiting nuclear, they're exiting hard coal and lignite, which of course for us is now a challenge, and we are dealing with that. And we are decarbonizing our portfolio by switching to gas as a bridge technology and looking into green gases and hydrogen to really make that happen, because the decarbonization can only work with carbonization in ways of electrification, more electrical energy for things, and hydrogen.
In terms of the transformation we've experienced this year with the COVID disruption, obviously the energy transition was a very big feature of the world and obviously of the Middle East as well. In committing to the energy transition, I'm wondering from your perspective, what impact has COVID had on the progress, on the momentum of the energy transition? Has it disrupted it or has it accelerated it? What's your experience? What do you think it will have?
Actually, that's an excellent question, because if you remember the financial crisis in 2008, there was just before that a lot of discussions about sustainability, CO2 prices, and then it suddenly went all away with the financial crisis. This time, I have to say, this is not happening. The Green Deal, the German hydrogen strategy, the other hydrogen strategies are still there. They're even, from my point of view, accelerating the speed of transformation. Instead of going backwards, I think we are going forward and with a higher speed than before I thought. And I think that's a good thing, because what we have to do is clear. We have to reduce our CO2 footprint, and now going backwards because of COVID wouldn't be a good thing to see, but I don't see any of that.
When we see a lot of countries pledging their efforts towards net zero, we've seen through COVID that seems to have become a more pronounced aspiration. Of course, pre-COVID and the Paris Climate Agreement, which just came into effect in the last week, all countries have their commitments to meet their Paris obligations. But we've seen countries commit to particular target dates for net zero, and most recently China identifying 2060. Do you think it'll be very different place in a year's time? Can these countries really reach these targets? Are they useful, do you think?
Well, I think they can be reached, but of course only if you're having a holistic view on that. If you look at Germany, Germany is committed to Paris. They want to be carbon neutral in 2050. But the electrical utilities, so by generating electrical energy, they are only responsible for 30% of the CO2 footprint of Germany. And we have reduced already quite dramatically our impact. 70% is industry, transportation, and buildings. And you have to go for sector coupling. You have to find a way to decarbonize these other sectors as well, which is quite a huge challenge. Some areas you can't hardly decarbonize, like cement production. For others, it's not an easy task, like in buildings, if you have a lot of old buildings. So I think it will be a massive effort with sector coupling to achieve that. And I already mentioned the two levers I see, electrification and hydrogen, actually is good for Uniper and our business, because this is where we are really pushing with innovations and with growth.
You were appointed this summer to the German National Hydrogen Council. What does that body do, and how important is the national hydrogen strategy of Germany? And can we learn from that, do you think, in the Middle East? It seems you've really taken some progressive steps.
Yeah, actually, it's a good concept which has been introduced actually with the coal exit as well, because to start the coal exit, a body like the Hydrogen Council, of course, for the coal exit was formed. So actually the people that are sitting there, they are subject matter experts, industry, NGOs, and politicians to consult the German government how to do this transformation into a hydrogen, into a CO2-free world. On the other hand, Germany has committed over 7 billion to install green hydrogen production in Germany with 5 gigawatts in 2030, enable international collaboration with some money and funds as well. And of course, the task of the Hydrogen Council is to do really the counseling. How should that work? Because one thing is, where should the hydrogen coming from? Which sources, which technology? And of course, creating the market mechanism, because it will only work if we create the demand and the incentive system to switching to electrification and to hydrogen. And that's actually the task of the Hydrogen Council, as I see it, to framework that, to foster that, and set it up to speed. And of course, getting a kind of legitimation, because there is not only industry sitting on the table, there are NGO sittings. It's a hard discussion, which hydrogen should be used, could be used, and how that would work. And that's, I think it's a typical German thing, but it was very successful for the coal exit.
We've been working with the German Energy Agency, connecting them with hydrogen opportunities for partnership in the Gulf, where the opportunity to produce green hydrogen here might be more available. It's setting up export to Germany. I'm wondering, where do you think that kind of partnership and what role it has to play in sort of accelerating the adoption of hydrogen?
That's a very important point, and good that you mentioned it. Because coming back to Germany, the 5 billion or the 5 gigawatts of hydrolysis for green hydrogen sounds quite a lot for 2030, but actually it will only generate around 14 to 15 terawatt hours of energy in hydrogen. The demand in 2030 is estimated at around 100 terawatt hours. So actually you need much, much more hydrogen to achieve your targets than you can really locally install in Germany. So you need to import hydrogen, that's for sure. There's no other way. And then the question is, where should the hydrogen coming from, and in which matter or in which form? And there, of course, this color code of hydrogen is kicking in, a kind of diverse family, which is growing month by month. Now we have added yellow hydrogen there as well. And that's an interesting topic, because to create green hydrogen, you need not only energy, you need sweet water. And of course, if Dubai is interested to create hydrogen, because there's a lot of sun there, as far as I remember, because I was often enough in Dubai and did business there, sun is there in abundance. But what about sweet water? Sweet water is a scarce resource as well. I think it's still the case that water is more expensive than gasoline in Dubai, which tells
that's certainly the case. In Oman, there's some other opportunities, but yes, water is a big challenge here. But one of the interesting things in Oman, where you have oil production, it comes with a large amount of associated water, produced water, and that water has to be processed and cleaned in order for it to be either useful or re-injected. So there may be some synergies there.
Yeah, And I see these synergies, but I see as well the possibility to produce hydrogen out of natural gas and use the CO2 to put the pressure back into the exploration sites. Then you have blue hydrogen, or to use pyrolysis with natural gas and separate the dark coal, which is not toxic, which you, as long as you don't burn it, it's not creating an issue. So I think at least for a transition period, I think we need hydrogen coming from different sources, not only green hydrogen. And I think it's exactly a good example about Oman. We have to find the right pockets how to produce it in a sustainable manner, being open for technology and for transportation, because we have to discuss transportation as well, and then it will work. I always a believer that there are no easy answers to complex questions, and the next couple of years and decades will be very exciting in that.
Well, that's one of the challenges, Andreas. Here, of course, the investment into R&D and new clean technology innovations. Last year, globally, I think about $30 billion went into that, but a lot of it lacks the journey to commercialization. And so you have to be very careful what horses you choose. I'm wondering, are there any other, we saw hydrogen, of course, anything else you might recommend, suggest that in choosing the right clean technologies, the Middle East might pay attention to?
Well, I think every government, every region have to look at their own issues and sources, how they want to decarbonize their society. And there's no magic strategy who does the trick for everybody. I know that Dubai has their other challenges. It's normally hot and sometimes humid. It's not so much cold, which is actually the case now in Germany. For us, it's gray without wind. We need heating now. So I think looking at the challenge and finding the right technology will be essential. I think we have enough R&D capacities to deal with that. If you look back at what has happened to renewable energy generation, solar and wind was not competitive. After Germany mainly poured billions into that, it was becoming cost competitive. Now it's cheaper to install solar and wind than to build traditional power plants. And I think the same thing will be possible with hydrogen or with artificial methane to solve our issues. And
it's even becoming a challenge here in the terms of gas to power, because also you have renewable solar becoming so competitive that, as you suggest, maybe gas to hydrogen might be another option.
Yeah, gas to hydrogen, as long as you're not setting CO2 free to the atmosphere, is for me a viable option, at least for a transition. And on the other hand, the energy you need to create hydrogen out of methane, out of natural gas, it's only, I think, 2.5 times less than creating hydrogen out of water. So it's energy efficient from my point of view as well, and cheap.
We've seen this year, Andreas, and perhaps it may come again next year, hopefully not, but nonetheless, you're experiencing it now in Germany, another economic lockdown right across Europe. I'm wondering, what impact do you think that is having on climate economics across the world, in Europe, and can we surmount the challenge that it's presenting?
Well, I think the COVID pandemic and the crisis is a very unique event. We haven't seen that for, I think, nearly 80 years. The last pandemic is probably decades away. We have different matters to deal with that. I think we have to make sure that this pandemic is not becoming a financial crisis, because of all the debt, with all the subsidies we are doing, that we are pointing it in the right direction, that there is a payback. I think pointing it into hydrogen and to sustainability development is a good idea, because you will have a payback on that and you will point it in the right direction. But nevertheless, it's a very, very unique challenge, and every country has to deal with that, not only with the medical crisis and situation, but as well as the economic outcome of that. And it will create a lot of cooperation and require a lot of corporations for the aftermath of the crisis, because first you have to survive the crisis, and then you have to see how to clear up the rubble and how you deal with that, right?
In terms of just talking a little bit about your recent news, at the end of last week, you announced that Uniper was reviewing Willemshaven LNG terminal. I'm wondering, what is the thinking there? And it's also been reported that perhaps it could be converted into hydrogen rather than LNG. But why is it not working at the moment? Is it related to the COVID disruption?
Well, maybe, but only remotely, because first of all, I can't tell you that because we have had a so-called open season where we have asked every customer who has interest to look at the papers and to state their interest in a binding matter. And our customers were not sufficiently interested to really sign on. Of course, in these open season, we are not allowed to talk to them. And now we can talk to them and ask them, okay, we thought we have a very interesting product. Why didn't you like it? Was it too expensive? Was it too much? Was it too long? What do we have to do to shape it to make it more attractive for you? And I think we are in that phase now. And one thing is probably COVID is creating some uncertainty about the future. You know, the gas prices are down, the oil prices are down. That maybe is not the best environment, but of course we have to push a project forward. We cannot wait forever. On the other hand, it gives us the opportunity to redirect it a little bit and say, look, maybe hydrogen, maybe artificial or green methanol or green methane, green gases are an option, and to reshape the project.
Is it such that perhaps Europe, there's LNG is in abundance, and that we are now moving into an area where longer term commitments are coming out of the market, an industry where, you know, not long ago it was 25 years contracts and commitments to invest in hard infrastructure. Now it's a lot more fluid and flexible, and the time horizons are much shorter.
Yeah, that could be one possibility, and that's exactly the discussions we want to have. We asked for contracts for 20 years. So of course they would run into the 40s. Most countries want to be CO2 neutral, or even going in a step already into the 30s already. So of course there could be something we have to discuss. Maybe a shorter period of time makes it more viable, but we have to find that out. But I think there could be a point. If everybody in Europe wants to be climate neutral in 2050, then of course going near to that date with long-term contracts could be an issue that we were at least a little bit worried about it, right? On the other hand, if you would switch everything what we are burning in Germany in coal and in oil to gas immediately, we would already move a very big step forward.
Just to wrap up, Andreas, there's been some significant announcements across the world in those places that have the funding, the stimulus packages. In Europe, they have put forward a $1 trillion, or close to $1 trillion stimulus, and they've assigned a significant portion of that towards green economics, the energy transition. I'm wondering, what do you expect that to deliver? What do you think it should be used for?
Well, I think that was what we have discussed at the beginning. I'm very positively surprised that the matter of CO2 neutrality, of sustainability, has not gone away with that crisis. Actually, it has been accelerated. Because most of the stimulus packages in Europe with the Green Deal, but as well in Germany, going in that direction of hydrogen, being greener, CO2 avoidance and all that. And I think that's the right way to do that. I think we have committed to Paris, and we have to fulfill it. And as an engineer, it means you have to just calculate backwards. And there are significant investments necessary to change our economy from a CO2 heavy industry to a CO2 neutral industry. And that will take some monies and some funds, definitely.
We've seen, obviously, in the last few days that the new administration coming into the US in the new year have a very big commitment towards the sort of energy transition in the US and maybe recommitting to Paris and so forth. What impact do you think that can have on all of these things if you have America fully committed to the transition and all of the technological developments that could come with that?
Well, I think one thing is clear. The US is one of the biggest emitters of CO2. And you cannot decarbonize the whole world in 2050 without the US and not without China. Germany is contributing 2% to the CO2 footprint of the world. So I think we make a difference by investing into technology, but even if Germany emits nothing, it doesn't solve the problem. So from that point of view, I think it's good that they're pushing in that direction. But nevertheless, even if the US has left the Paris Agreement, they have emitted last year and probably this year less CO2 than before, because they are switching from coal to gas, for economic reasons. And actually, if they are part of Paris or not, they have done the right thing from my point of view and reduced their CO2 footprint. And I think that's the biggest risk from my point of view, that we are not able to transform the matter of CO2 freeness and sustainability into a business. That's the end. At the end, the technology is not cost competitive and better than before, then we will run into an issue, because then of course it will not work. And I think that goes perfectly the way.
And it creates perhaps a bigger market for all of the green economy, the clean technologies that have a scale of operation to work with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, you need the demand, you need the technology, you need some investments. So from that point of view, we have to move it forward.
And clearly, the American companies, of course, we've seen the European energy companies make commitments to transition, and the oil majors, BP and Shell, obviously following E.ON and Uniper, which you did a few years ago. And now the American companies may be following in the coming years. It creates, I suppose, greater opportunities, greater competition.
Well, I think one thing is clear: you have to act. You cannot stand still. You have to transform your business and yourself. And if you look at our example, Uniper was part of E.ON, and then we got separated, we got spun off, and we got all the assets which were supposedly didn't have a future, or the dark assets, the CO2 heavy things. And now I think with our new strategy, we have a future, because we are driving that change. We are betting on gas, we are betting on hydrogen. We think that is the right bridge technology. There will be no stranded assets. That's the right way with electrification and hydrogen to decarbonize the society. And actually, we are defining our own future. Of course, we could have just said, look, forget it. We were spun off because there was no future. But it's always a matter of fact if you accept your fate or you're trying to change it. And I think so far we are holding up pretty good, and we have the right technology and the right people, especially, to drive that transformation for Uniper.
And it's also, in a way, I suppose, compelled you to go globally where E.ON was very Germany focused. Uniper has now the opportunity and the achievement of operating internationally and including here in the Middle East.
Yeah, you know, Uniper is, with the global commodity business, one of the biggest trader in that space without own production. So we have the network, how to trade gas, LNG. We have in Fujairah production site where we produce sulfur low gasoline for ships to make the air cleaner. So, and this is very helpful, because we know that if we are switching to hydrogen, it needs to be traded, it needs to be originated, it needs to be shipped, it needs to be stored and distributed. Actually, all that what we are doing for a living, and where we consider ourselves very good in it.
And best of luck. And perhaps, Andreas, that's a good place to finish this week's 2-Minute Warning feature interview. Thank you, Mr. Andreas Scheringbeck of Uniper CEO. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.